Maddie, thank you for making time to have this conversation today, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm excited.
I remember when you first posted on social that you were going to raise money for your dear friend who is suffering a battle with cancer, and that you decided to run the largest cycling fondo in North America, the RBC Grand Fondo. And I thought, okay, I know there's a significant elevation change there. I know it's 1,900 meters now
Yeah.
over that 125 kilometers. So that's a big task to set yourself up for. Walk us through when you decided to
The
do
train
this.
of thought.
Why?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Why did we do this,
walk
right?
us through this. Yeah.
So, yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mike. It's a joy to be here and it's so, pleasure to reconnect. So, I'll walk you back. So, back in March of 2024, Krista Galoyan, she's a two-time Olympian, Olympic silver medalist, and a mother of two with a 6 and 4 year old at the time. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And immediately post discovering this, her sister put up a GoFundMe and I reached out. We hadn't spoken for about 20 years. We both went to university together. We stayed in contact simply from social media platforms, and that's it. And I had this calling. I felt like it was my opportunity to be in service. And when I was discussing things with both Krista and her sisters, one thing that was common and commonly shared amongst us is that in order to raise money for someone facing a battle of cancer, we need to inspire people. And everyone has a cancer story nowadays, whether it's your dad or your grandfather, your mother, your aunt or uncle. And how do we set the stage so that we can raise enough funds for Krista to get leading edge treatment down in the US, which is not covered, and make a difference in her life and hopefully inspire people along the way. When we made the decision, or I made the decision to commit to running Vancouver to Whistler, which, like you said, was 125 kilometers, 1,900 meters of elevation, that was going to really test my limits physically and mentally, right? And much more than that, actually, looking back. Nonetheless, this is how we can inspire people. So we wanted to inspire others to support someone who truly inspired us on the global sports stage, right, of the Olympics many, many times. And this is the means that I felt was appropriate and pushing my limits to get this done.
Well, and so let's, for the listeners, you're a super fit guy. You'd run one marathon. How long ago was that?
Yeah, that was 14 years ago. So I like to tell people I'm not a runner. I ran the 2011 Berlin Marathon. At that time, that was the last time that I'd run an official 10K even. So 14 years later, I made the decision to run an ultra, which was over 3 marathons and pretty much all uphill, right? To your point. And I had the calling to do so. And I'm super grateful that my conditioning, I'm in peak performance right now at the age of 43, and I could actually jump on this opportunity without reconsidering where my health was at.
So even fit people like you who are working out all the time and own Opscotch, or co-founder of Opscotch, which is a company devoted to health and wellness, and are super fit, there's a difference between being super fit and then deciding to run uphill for 125 kilometers. So how much time did you have to actually get your body ready for this ultra marathon?
Yeah, well, the universe was presenting us this Project 125 because in the early days, Krista and her sisters, we were discussing the opportunity for me to run 125 kilometers from Vancouver to Whistler. And then I put it over to them, how much money do we have to raise? And the consensus was 125,000. Sure enough, the day that I committed to running this, I remember texting Krista and her sister saying, I'm in, let's go. And I pulled into the coffee shop and it was 125 days out of the date that we had agreed upon. So I had to ramp up all my training, all my running in a matter of 125 days to get to that start line.
That's not a long time.
No. And so there was quite a few sacrifices along the way. We really had to adjust things from a typical ultra, training program. Typically, you need, many more months than what I had, especially, as an ultra runner. They would typically have a foundation of marathon running beforehand, right? Which I didn't have any of that. So we definitely had to expedite the training plan. Early on, I had reached out to a couple ultra marathon coaches, and it was in the early days, and we had some buy-in. But quite frankly, there was even a couple ultra coaches that had said, you know what, you don't have much time, and I don't have the time to manage this. And so I actually did this absent of an ultra coach.
And so, okay, now I know you didn't have an ultra coach. You did have quite a few. You had sponsors. You had a whole team behind you helping to support you. So, what was the team that you put together? I mean, there's only one person on the road running 125 kilometers, and that's you. And
That's me.
for that to be possible, there needs to be a pretty strong team behind you to make all of that come together over those 125 days, and then to support you on the actual run. So walk us through who the team was that helped get you there.
For sure. So in the early days, when I committed to running Vancouver to Whistler, I was working with Krista and her family, her sisters, and also with Anna Brooks, who is a friend of mine from an entrepreneur community that you're aware of. And she came in on operations to help some of the logistics in the early days. Nonetheless, we started putting forward our plan. And in British Columbia, if you want to hold an event on a highway, because it's the Sea to Sky highway that I was going to run on, we wanted to do it formally. We wanted to officially have our event permit. And so we had to work with the government, the Ministry of Transportation, and it's a one-page application. It is pretty straightforward, but at the very end of it, it says, please provide your safety plan, medical plan, road closure plan, your crowd control plan, your media plan, all of this. This was foreign to us. So immediately went to work. And over the next 2.5 weeks, we submitted a 66-page application to the government to try to get our event permit to hold this event officially, rather than just Matt tying up his shoes. So after that was submitted, we were fortunate that the RBC Grand Fondo heard about our story. And when it landed on the CEO's desk, he unsolicited gave me a phone call and said that he's heard about our story. He's inspired by what I'm looking to embark on. He's has all the time in the world for Olympic athletes, women in sport, wants to support that narrative. And Krista, our recipient, her sister, Leah Galoyan, was the very first female rider to win the RBC Grand Fondo 14 years prior. So it was a full circle moment. She still holds the women's record, actually, for females. Okay. And so it was a full circle moment. And that's when the RBC Grand Fondo asked if I wanted to be the sole runner of their event. And I would have to push our dates up by 2 weeks. So I actually had less than 125 days. It was more about 115 days to start training. So as we submitted all that, then we started pulling together the team. I didn't have a robust team operationally. I was working directly with Anna, operations, that was working a lot of the logistics behind the scene, a lot of the fundraising efforts, and then, directly with Krista and her family. Nonetheless, as we progressed, really leaning on my business partner in Opscotch, Spencer Coppin, has a lengthy history in longevity and peak performance medicine. And yeah, we work together side by side. And then just with my experience from a kines background, understand with Opscotch and understanding overall human performance, we were able to get the job mostly done. Along the way, we were super blessed with the Canadian Sport Institute, who creates an environment for our Olympic athletes in Canada. They have a location at UBC, also in Victoria and in Whistler. And they came on board as a partner, and they helped me understand from a physiological level what my body could do during a run like this. So we started doing some testing within the lab and really unpacking what my requirements from a physiological level, whether that be carb intake, calorie intake, what my energy expenditure is on the road, what my ideal pace for running. So we work closely with them to really fine tune things before I entered the run on September 6th.
And what was that like as you started to learn more about your own body? Like, you're already a fit guy going into this, and now they're subjecting you to tests and putting you on machines and all that kind of stuff. What did you learn about your own wellness going into this race that was going to be a factor as you decided to run what is already a grueling cycling race? Mm-hmm. And you're deciding that you're going to run it instead. So what did you learn through this process?
Well, working closely with the Canadian Sport Institute was amazing. For any listeners out there that have heard of the VO2 max test or the lactate threshold test, those are two very notable tests to really assess cardiovascular health and your performance levels. Nonetheless, it wasn't relevant to our testing and the point that where we were at or I was at from a training perspective and in advance of the. But what we did assess is my running economy, which I believe most listeners probably haven't heard about. So that running economy really emulated our lactate threshold test that I had done a year prior. And I was running at different speeds, increasing it every 3 minutes on the treadmill within a lab environment. And what we understood is how many calories I would be burning per hour, what the carb burn per hour was, and what my most efficient pace would be to do this course. So as an example, we unpacked and I learned that at a 2% incline, I would burn 48 grams of carbs per hour. Yet at a 4% incline, I would burn 78 grams per carbs per hour. I also understood that my most efficient pace for this long distance would be approximately 637-minute kilometers. So if I could just tailor any of my daytime performance around those metrics, then I'd be setting myself up for success.
And knowing that pace, obviously the elevation is changing throughout this entire race. That road is twists and turns and is up and down. And I think there's a very mild flat stretch through Squamish, which I'm not even sure it's flat. It's like it's got a slight incline to it.
I was begging for that one. I was begging for that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because it looks flat when you're driving in a car. It is called the Sea to Sky Highway because you are literally going from sea level up into the mountains. And so, how do you run this? You don't run this in advance. Like, it's not like you go and run 120. Like, I'll go check it out. I'll just go do the 125 kilometers. So as you started to amp up your distance, what were the kinds of training splits, like the run lengths that you'd be going to get ready for this?
Yeah, great question, Mike. So when I was training for this, because it was an expedited window of training time, right? Like we really had to fast track things. In a typical program, you would incorporate long distance runs every week, multiple of them. You would do some hill training. You would also do some pace work, right? What your perceived ideal pace would be, shorter distances. And you would do that like multiple training sessions throughout the week. Now, because I had to expedite it, I didn't have that foundation from long distance running. We had to make sacrifices. And the decision was to really just focus on the long distance training. So I forewent any kind of hill training during the week, any kind of pace training, any kind of sprint or interval training. I primarily only did 2 long distance runs every weekend. And that was because I just needed to get the pounding on the knees and the legs. That was get accustomed to that. So as we advanced towards the run day of September 6th, I was doing stacking long distance runs Saturday, Sunday, every single week. So that looked like, a marathon is 43 kilometers, 26 miles. I was doing a marathon on Saturday, and then I would do another 35K on the Sunday. The following week, I would increase that by about 15%, and I would do 50 kilometers on the Saturday, and I would do 40 kilometers on the Sunday. And then I went up to 53 kilometers on the Saturday and 48 kilometers on the Sunday. So it was a really expedited training program. And it was a difficult one mentally as well, both physically and mentally. I was doing this in complete solitude, as in I don't have a running community. I wasn't running with anyone. This is me having the motivation to get up every day and get to the start line and really push through any of those mental, emotional, or physical challenges. Quite frankly, there was one point near the peak of my training, which was only a couple weeks out, that I believe I had a stress fracture in my foot. I've yet to post or share anything on that. I was really afraid of sharing that publicly at the time because I felt like perhaps the RBC Gran Fondo would feel that I wasn't fit to do the run, and safety was the number one priority and medical concerns. I didn't share that, but I did go to the hospital, had to get an x-ray. I had some hip pain and some knee pain as well. But overall, yeah, my body held up pretty good in the expedited training program, aside from my foot.
And so for listeners who aren't runners and they hear 50 kilometers, how long is a 50-kilometer training run in time?
Yeah, typically I would spend about 5 to 5.5 hours on the road. We were blessed in Vancouver, BC, to have gorgeous weather this summer. And so there's something called the seawall. And I really prioritize a lot of my running on the seawall. It's just this scenic, right on the water. If you do it from start to finish, it's around 30 kilometers. So I ended up turning around at the end and coming back. And that was the route that I really leaned into during my training runs. Nonetheless, one consideration that was a little bit of an oversight is that I didn't incorporate any hills. So that is a completely flat running path. Nonetheless, what I did identify as perhaps an oversight or a weak spot is not so much running uphill in my training, but running downhill or walking downhill. Yeah,
Okay.
as much as
So
there's a
speak more about
19,
that.
yeah, as much as there's a 1900-meter elevation in the Vancouver to Whistler track that I did, there's a lot of downhill, right? And that's hard on the knees. It's hard on your quads,
Hmm.
and that is something that I quickly understood only a couple weeks out that I need to start prioritizing this. So I was doing a lot of hill work, just walking up and down really steep hills the week out from the run, just to kind of get my body used to my specific muscles, used to a little bit of that downhill work.
And so now you know that as one of the things that was helpful in terms of preparing your training. What else did you learn? Like if you were to do this all over again and you had the same time frame, you said you had that 125 ish or 115 days out from the run. What else did you learn about the training that you would consider doing differently?
Yeah, I think that the fueling aspect is something that I really learned late in the days of training. That was working with the Canadian Sport Institute. I think I would experiment a little bit more. Now, the reason why I say that is because when we entered the running on September 6th at the start line down in Cole Harbour in Vancouver, we had to manage my caloric intake and my carb intake. I had to consume 40 grams of carbs every half an hour. So to put that in perspective for you, Mike, and the listeners, is that some people don't even have 25 grams of carbs in a day. So I was eating 40 grams of carbs per half an hour. And so one really fascinating thing that I learned with the Canadian Sport Institute was that people get palate fatigue. So palate fatigue, they just cannot eat any of the food anymore because their palate can't accept it. And I went to the coaches that I was leaning on and I said, no, I'm good. Like I can eat the same steak bowl 3 times a day for 3 months straight. And they're like, Maddie, you're going to get palate fatigue. And so nonetheless, during the run, we had everything. We had yams with maple syrup. We had banana bread. I had pancakes with brown sugar. I had Fantas and Cokes, like real Cokes. And it was like anything to get those simple carbs in my body. And without a skip, I ended up getting palate fatigue really early on. Like, I think it was probably around 60 kilometers. So halfway through, it was like I couldn't bear to taste another banana bread. I couldn't bear to have another rice ball. Like you really just had to lean into whatever was really feeling at the time. And yeah, that's a thing. So experimenting with food, but prior to the actual run day would have been something that I should have adjusted my body to in my training too beforehand.
I've never heard, this is the first time I've heard of palate fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And it never would dawn on me that part of your training program was just getting used to taking in the quantity of calories and carbohydrates and that you need to be able to do a race like this. I think, I've never heard of that before. And that's a fascinating limiting factor
Big time.
on doing an ultra run like this.
Yeah, you can't just rely on those gels, right? And, Morton, which is a very popular and high-performing gel right now, they came in as sponsors and sponsored me. So it was great to have them on board. Yeah, really high-quality product. Having said that, I can't just rely on gels for 18 hours, right? We needed real food, and we had to prioritize real food. I remember in the darkest of the moments, in the middle of the night, I got to my support vehicle and I was like, can I have a Fanta? Like, I'm begging the support team, can I have a Fanta? I just want a Fanta. They're like, Maddie, have some real food. I'm like, and a Fanta. I want a Fanta right now. And anyways, it was like, I can laugh at it now because it was just, anything that my palate could accept it was what I needed at the time, right? So to work through those dark moments, especially.
So you talk about I want to come back and talk a little bit more about these dark nights or the darkness of night as you're running. And you've mentioned sponsors. So while we're at it, you talked about Morton's. Who are the other sponsors that were actually engaged and involved in helping, not just with the run itself, but with the recovery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, one of our big sponsors was reigning champ, Aritzia. They were just phenomenal coming on and really getting me in my performance gear. They ended up doing our whole event merch as well. I chose them. Vancouver story, they originated in Vancouver. They have high performance training gear. They support athletes on and off the field. And they provided me a lot of like a whole run kit, multiple change of clothes. And I actually didn't even change my clothes over the course of 18 hours. I changed my shoes, but not any of my garments. Hoka came on board. They were my shoe of choice. They were my shoe of choice to begin with. So I had multiple pairs of Hokas throughout the training and even on the event day. I swapped through about 4 pairs during the one run. Then we had Element was an electrolyte company. Opscotch, of course, we came on board and supported my run for all the protein and some other supplements for performance and recovery. I'm missing a couple here.
Myo Detox, I think, was your partner.
Detox, great partner. That was really primarily for my, they got me to the start line. That was like prevention of any kind of pain, ensuring my body's moving in the right patterns. We had run assessments. I had RMT sessions. They were huge supporters all the way along. And even post-race, they were great in supporting us as well.
And okay, so I appreciate you mentioning all that, because it's along with your support, and you had a support crew. So you mentioned Anna Brooks, I think she was driving the van, right?
Oh yeah, we interchanged a little bit, right? Yeah, she was great.
Okay, so Anna was there from the very beginning as kind of your right hand through this process, and then you had some friends from an organization we belong to called MMT that flew in from like all over the place.
All over, to New York, Virginia, Toronto, yeah.
So talk to me about that crew and what their responsibility was throughout the race and supporting.
So yeah, I'm super fortunate. I'm humbled on how much support I had, and from both a support crew, like literally on and like just that figurative support that I had from like just friends and family. Nonetheless, a bunch of people flew into town and they wanted to be there. They wanted to be involved. Now, we didn't determine who was going to be in the support vehicles till really at the 11th hour. And the reason is, first of all, there was a lot of people that wanted to be involved. And I was super grateful for that. Having said that, about 3 days out of the run, I was talking with the high performance coaches at Canadian Sport Institute. And one of them, who really primarily focuses on marathon and ultra marathon runners, has an extensive background in that and their fueling needs and nutrition. He says to me on a call, "Matt, I think you're underestimating the run you're going to do." I said, "Okay." He's like, "I want to put this in perspective. Every pro marathoner finishes the race. Every pro ultra runner does not finish. So you have to be laser focused and you have to take all your fueling very, very serious. Because if you do not, stay on top of that and adhere to what we're recommending, you could put yourself out of the game like early on, right? And there's no coming back." And so one piece of advice that he shared with me on top of what I just mentioned was every single opportunity, continue to move forward. So don't be walking in circles in a parking lot taking a break. Don't be standing still. Like, keep moving forward. And it's such a parallel in life as well. And when I was doing this 125 kilometer run, it was like being mindful of expending my energy properly and really moving forward. Because if I had to walk for an hour broken up throughout it, that'd be an additional 5K, right? So we're using that energy wisely. Now, this tailors into, and circling back to your original comments around the support, when he mentioned this to me, it was really like, being a priority of like not expending my energy with a bunch of cheerleaders in the vehicle. As much as that energetically would be great, I had to remain really focused on what I was trying to achieve here. And so it was only at the very 11th hour when I really tried to determine who do I need at the sport vehicle at what time through the run. So we were very methodical about it. In the early stages of the run, the first marathon, the first 43 kilometers, which took us, for those that are listening in Vancouver, it would take us just about Britannia Beach. That was daytime hours. So I was like, I'm going to have my business partner, Spencer Coppin, in there. He has a deep history of professional sport. He played for the Vancouver Whitecaps, pro soccer, and he has a background in all longevity medicine. And he was really monitoring, okay, are we executing and delivering on all these nutrition needs and these hydration needs? And we're going to get a cadence going. So we're going to build in that rhythm right out of the gates. Now we're getting to dark hours. So at 8:30 approximately is when it started getting really dark. And I ran majority of the run in the darkness. So at 8:30 is when we did a transition of our support team, because I didn't want the support team to go all the way through the night and be tired themselves, right? I needed new energy. I needed different people in it. And that would ignite me throughout and fuel me to get to the finish line. So I had people transferring in and out on multiple shifts. A dear friend who you're also friends with, Catherine Leola, was paramount in being in the vehicle. She's a seasoned triathlete, done Ironmans. She's done distances in the dark. And she jumped in the sport vehicle at 1 a.m. and saw it through all the way to the finish. Yeah, special place in my heart for her. And she really motivated me, among everyone else in the support vehicle, to get to that finish line. We had a doctor in board. We had 2 doctors, an ICU doctor that was available, Dr. Kanji, Dr. Etta Karabaj, oh my God, Dr. Etta Karabaj, I can't even say it right now. I apologize. Karabaj. Yeah, Dr. Etta. Anyways, so we had multiple doctors in the vehicle, and yeah, it was great to have that support and get me to the finish line.
And now I saw, as I was watching the Instagram, because I tracked your race the whole night and into the next day, and I saw that people were jumping out of the support vehicle and actually running with you. So what was it like? Was it helpful to have somebody like out there with you running? Is that to take away the loneliness? Is that to help with pace? Is that for mindset? Like knowing what you know now, what was the benefit or not of actually having people in the support vehicle like Catherine, like Mike, like others who could run the distance with you?
Yeah, so that was only for a short period of the time. That was in the night hours when it was dark and lonely. I think, and it got really dark, it got extremely lonely. And those were the hard kilometers as well. If, in my training, I never surpassed 54 kilometers. So when we got into the 65, 70 kilometer range, this was foreign territory for me. And then all the uphill. So when those individuals jumped out, they were doing just a couple K at a time to really, just guide me, just to create conversation, just to be there for whatever I needed. Many of them were like, they kept talking to me and they said, if you want me to stop talking, then I'll stop talking. And sometimes it was, just to create new energy. Nonetheless, the pace helped. I think, holistically, the involvement of their running was equally beneficial for me as it was for them, which is just a beautiful thing that I found out afterwards. Everyone that was involved in the support vehicle had walked away saying that it changed their life, that it was super inspiring, that they were like blessed to be involved. And I just am so incredibly grateful that they were there as motivation. But I think it was something that I gave back to them as well, which is really cool.
And so you wrap up, what time of morning did you end up crossing the finish line? 125 kilometers in beautiful Whistler, British Columbia. Walk us through what it was like to that last kilometer. You basically at this point, you've done this race. Now, the thing is, it's still undulating hills for that last sort of kilometer.
Oh, yeah.
That last bit is no joke. And so tell us what it was like to know that you'd done it, like you were going to pull this off, you were going to cross the finish line, and what it was like to actually cross the finish line. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little in behind the scenes. This is pretty funny. So most people in the support vehicle were not from Vancouver or Whistler, right? They were from the East Coast. So we're getting there. And like you had mentioned before, we had never done the course, right? So I'm familiar with kind of roughly where we're at. And anyway, so we're about 5 kilometers out. And for context, we were working directly with the RBC Grand Fondo. It was their 15th year. Like you said before, North America's largest cycling race. There's up to 10,000 participants, right? And I had to thread the needle. So I had to cross the grand finish in Whistler between the times of 9:20 and 9:35. That was what the window I had. I had a 15-minute window after running for 18 hours. So the reason being is because the Grand Fondo is the main course that goes exactly the route that I ran, but they had a smaller course in Whistler that's a 55-kilometer course where riders are leaving the start line or the finish line area at 9:15. So once those riders left, it's for the Medio, it's the smaller course. Once they left, then I would be slotting through before the pro riders entered Whistler at approximately 9:50. So if I did not get there at that time, they were going to take me off the course. So nonetheless, we're approaching Whistler. They're rolling hills still. We're trying to time this perfectly. And I'm looking at the watch and I'm looking at the distances, and someone in the support vehicle says, we have 5.1 kilometers left. I'm like, no. And I'm like, I'm owning this. I'm owning this. This is my moment. And like, I appreciate you. I love you guys, but that's wrong. We only have 3.1. And they're like, no, it's 5.1. I'm like, you're wrong. I'm looking at my watch. I know where I am. I'm like, we got 3.1. And we're like really sensitive on time right now. And anyways, we were going back and forth. I was getting a little frustrated, but it was also how much energy I had in my tank because I was feeling it with those hills towards the end.
Yeah.
I was like, and the things were in pain, all of it. And this is where I could taste the finish. And I was not messing this up. Right. So we got literally 2 kilometers out. I think it was about a kilometer out. We were radioing back and forth with the RBC Grand Fondo team. And then I showed up early and they're like, get them through the finish line, get them through. And so they're like, rather than waiting post 9:15, they're like, let's get them before 9. And so literally I had 10 minutes to get to the finish line before 9. And I was about a kilometer out. And, at that point, I'm running like 7.5 minute kilometers. And it was go time. It was go time. And next thing you know, I'm running and I had people FaceTiming me from the van, those that couldn't make it. It was a beautiful moment. And I just had a burst of energy. And I was just like, I got to get there. And so we ended up crossing at 8:55 a.m., half an hour early. It was spectacular. It was executed perfectly. The Grand Fondo was just so supportive. And as I crossed that finish line, the first person there was Krista, the recipient. And I just ran into her arms. And anyone that's seen the footage, I actually took a leap of faith and I jumped into her arms and yeah, we just hugged it out. And we just reaffirmed with each other that like we did this. And it's something that we dreamt of that wasn't impossible, but it was definitely improbable. And we looked at each other and we're like, we did it. And it was the biggest joy and excitement, one of the biggest moments in my life.
What a beautiful way to end that race. And so let's add a little context into this. So you left Cole Harbour, the starting line, at what time of night?
At 2 p.m. on the Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
You arrived at 8:55 Saturday morning, running
Correct.
all throughout the night. Now, to give you a context of what it's like to cycle this race, the pro cyclists would have been leaving Saturday morning at
7
and arriving in Whistler
close to 10. So like 3 hours. Yeah.
So this is there's a 3-hour window. They're basically you're running.
They're pros.
These are
do
pros,
that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So these are this is what they do, right? They do these cycling races around the world. They're sponsored athletes, and they're basically chasing you down on their bikes, right, from Vancouver. You've been running all night, and you got to get that window to get there before 9. In the 9:20 to 9:35, you finish at 8:55 before they let the other race even get out of this. It's an unbelievable. I know the story, and hearing it again, thank you for taking the time to describe the details of it and the behind the scenes, because it's just an unbelievable thing that you set out to do. Having, run a marathon, 13 years ago, run a 10K, in between that, and then decide to run 125 kilometers from the ocean in Vancouver all the way up to 1,900 meters of elevation, 125 kilometers up to Whistler, BC, to raise money for your friends. So it's an unbelievable accomplishment, and it's a beautiful thing that you've done to support Krista. My gut's telling me that in naming it Project 125, that this isn't the end. So I'm wondering if you can share with the listeners what's next after this for you.
Well, that's a question that's come up a lot after I completed this. And of course, I'm just sinking in with reality and just like cherishing the moments of the run. When we set out to do this, it was about building a legacy of support to help athletes faced with sudden health adversities beyond the finish line. And Krista was our first recipient. And this is just building out a bigger vision and mission for the project. And we were successful. We set out in 125 days to run 125 kilometers to collectively raise 125,000, and we surpassed that in such a short period of time. So, kudos to everyone, all the supporters, donors, Krista's whole family, like everyone that was behind that made this happen. It was definitely a community-based thing. Having said that, we did everything formally and officially. We went through all the hoops with the Ministry of Transportation, the government, to get our event permit. one thing that I never mentioned is we applied for the event permit to be awarded that 2.5 months prior to the date. And we didn't receive the event permit formally until 2 hours before I was planning on leaving Vancouver. And so we did receive it. And this now getting that accreditation just means that we did the right steps and they believed in us in executing that event. And I believe, for all intents and purposes, we did. We adhered to everything that we set out to do from a formal event perspective. So if I were to look at Project 125 going forward, there's a lot of stuff, swirling around of ideas, many people sharing their thoughts, which I'm grateful for. But I think going forward is considering if we would rinse and repeat and scale the same event again. We did get the formal event permit and we understand how to map this out, how to tie this in with the RBC Grand Fondo. So there's some considerations around that. Like this could be a legacy event that we could create year over year and really perfect what we set out to do originally. Nonetheless, wherever we go, it is about building a legacy for athletes beyond the finish line. And we're excited for the next chapter.
Maddie, it's an incredible thing that you've done and a beautiful thing you've done to help to support athletes that are having health challenges. You did it in a way, I think, a lot of people said you could have put up a GoFundMe campaign, as was already done, and then help to support that. And you said, no, I'm going to go do a very hard thing for fun to help to support my friend and, create a legacy around it, as you say. Well, I'm just incredibly impressed by what you've accomplished, my friend. It's an honor to know you. And I'm excited to see what's next for Project 125. Thank you for spending time to share your story with our listeners today.
Hey, thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, thank you for all your support over the years and for letting me share the story. Really appreciate it.
Okay, recording stopped. How was that for you?
It was awesome, but can we splice